But the idea, I think, would be to try to come to some sort of new understanding, and one way to do that is try to push on things. And I think what's key in that kind of inquiry, or I found it to be key, is if you have a thought that you're not, that's kind of half-baked or half-formed, that you don't be shy about putting it out there. And then we can all help each other kind of clarify our thinking. It's just sometimes the half-baked thought or coming from an intuition or some other place is really valuable. And it's sort of like a thought struggling to be born. And if we help each other kind of clarify our thoughts, then maybe we'll be able to get at something that excites us. So that's the idea.
Did you share your concern about time?
Huh?
Also made a last night about questions.
Well, I just think that I agree that I think this would be a really helpful way to approach getting to the meat and to some of the real substance about what we're trying to do here, and comparing it to what you guys were trying to do with your work in a day. And if we, just have a specific time period that we're going to, do this method, and that's cool. I'm down with it. So, do the morning session in this fashion, and then, after lunch, come back and kind of like resume with some of the parts of the agenda with the story circle, and possibly reading part of one of the pieces. I think, do we have that for everybody, or is it? Well, maybe we can get that. Maybe we can get that during lunch. So I'm good. And we can go ahead and jump into the conversation and do probing.
Carlton's question was with regards to time, and when we start throwing out multiple questions, and do we just trust that we'll spend time on what the questions are about, or do we set any parameters of time in terms of the time we have together? So do we look at trying to limit anything, Dudley, in your idea of this?
Well, I'd say, just given the time's 9:45, we maybe take an hour on the one and then flip it, take another hour. And, the group, if you feel we're getting stuck, it's, some of us feel we're getting stuck or just going over the same thing. Just, I'd say raise a hand, say let's push on, let's push to a new issue.
Right.
We don't want to get hung up on one thing. So we got to keep moving it. Somebody maybe somebody could, I'm just making this up, but maybe somebody could take responsibility for the sort of push if it feels like we're getting redundant or, In other words, we could go on forever on issue A, but we got to get to X, Y, and Z too. You want to take that responsibility?
Yeah, I can do that. Cool.
Let's make sure we sort of cover the waterfront.
So, who wants to throw the first jab? Bruce? Oh, no, I thought you was like,
Opening up, we saw you opening up.
So, in looking in retrospect to the purpose that was there with your collaboration and what we're trying to do now, what do you think? How successful do you think you were with getting your point across? Or how unsuccessful do you think you were with getting your point across to where we're at the same point now?
I'm not altogether certain I know what the point
This is what I'm saying. Okay.
was.
Okay. Okay, I got you. Because you was talking about the question.
I think the point, more than anything else for me, was to explore and try to find a way out of no way. I guess, well, I'm fond of telling this story. Some of you have heard it before, but the story of how we began to correspond and communicate and work together. I heard about Roots, and must have been about 1975, 76, somewhere in there. At the time, we had a group of about 10 people working with Free Southern Theater, which was still extant. And when I heard about this formation of cultural workers in the South, I thought, white folks getting together again. We better check it out and find out which way the wood they're chopping is gonna fall, so we can make sure it don't fall on us. Get out of the way, at least. I had little interest in being involved with such a formation, but did feel like that given the history and given that the fact that it was a pregnant moment historically. The civil rights movement was over, and the new formation was in development, and it wasn't clear what direction it was going. And I thought, well, maybe somebody ought to go over there and just meet with them, find out. This was coming up to the meeting at Highlander. And a guy named Jesse Morrell, who was our community engagement person, agreed to go, and he went by himself. Now, I'd heard about Roadside before all this. I was up in Knoxville working with a group called the Play Group, which Bob Leonard, no, it's not the Play Group, but that wasn't Bob Leonard, two other people, they'd asked me to help them make a piece. And while working on that piece about the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, Knoxville is right near Highlander, and I knew Miles Horton, who was the founder and director of Highlander, and had a great respect for him as a thinker and as a tireless advocate for organizing oppressed and exploited people. And so Miles, while I was up there, I took the script that I was working on over there and read it to Highlander staff. We read it together and asked for their opinions and advice about what we were trying to do, and they said they enjoyed it. But Miles, I was staying at his house that weekend. So after everybody left, he told me, he said, well, there's a group of fellas over here. One of them used to work out here, Vietnam vet, named Ron Short. He said they call themselves Appalachian nationalists. They're trying to do something like what y'all trying to do down there. So y'all ought to meet each other, talk about what you're doing. Maybe something will come up. And so with that kind of introduction, I'm thinking, there's something interesting here. And on my next trip up to Knoxville, working with the play group on this piece, which was turning into a monster of a job because, we had differences about what ought to be trying to happen. And so we're working with, do you know the Songwriter Cycle? Well, all the singers and songwriters I know say of Cy that he's a good organizer. And all the organizers I know say of Cy, he's a good songwriter. And Cy goes on tirelessly, just working, writing songs and organizing. Then the idea was to take Cy's songs and build a piece about the Southern Tenant Farmers Union. And it was to be called, after one of the songs, If I Live to See Next Fall. Which has kind of an ominous quality to it. So while we were working on this piece, Dudley and I believe it was Tommy Bledsoe and I don't know, Frankie, and it was the Red Fox Gang. They were on their way to do a performance somewhere, and they stopped by to visit with us. And they were in a hurry, so they didn't stay long. So I said, so that's Roadside. And to cut to the relationship that evolved from that, what happened with If I Live to See Next Fall is that it came off fairly well, but it didn't have a happy ending. And Mac Purple, who was like one of the two centers of the leadership in that group, wanted a happy ending, and eventually he hired Steve Kent, my director at that time, to come in and help him remount it after we got through with it. And the piece turned into, instead of If I Live to See Next Fall, it became Some Sweet Day. And the Southern Tenant Farmers Workers Union was an initiative of the Communist Party USA in the South in the 30s to organize tenant farmers and to do it on a multiracial basis. And the thing that was that Mac and company were most interested in was the interracial character of the effort. And they didn't have any black people in the group though, so it was kind of hard to cast. And so I reasoned that the way to work then is to work with the people you have in your group and build a piece that explores their relationship to this initiative from within the dialogue. And I was happy with what we found. But at the time, Steve got a hold of it, and Mac started angling towards Some Sweet Day. They cast a whole bunch of black people that were only talked about in the other piece. And it got to be kind of, I disassociated from it because, you know, I just didn't believe it. But to get to Dudley, who I later met, and in '76, I guess it was, in Sarasota, as I recall. And I'm thinking, again, I was the only one available to go to this, to that first meeting. It was a little festival and meeting, but people were bringing their work. I didn't bring anything, because I didn't have anything at that point to share. And, but I was still on this mission, find out what was going on, what was this organizing impulse. And I saw Red Fox, the show that these guys had brought, which is about the impact of, if you haven't seen it, it's about the impact of the industrialization of the coal mining industries and so forth in southern Appalachia, the impact of that on the culture and the people. And built up out of folk tales and stories that I was impressed with the performance and with the simultaneous grounding in the culture and the focus on an important issue, using the culture as an avenue to approach it. That's interesting. And the Roadside Gang was the only gang at that first Roots meeting that I went to who had beer after everybody else closed down.
Wow.
and guitars and singing, and I said, well, it's my kind of people over here, they singing and playing music and drinking beer. So I angled over to that part of the conference and was handed a cold beer. I said, these people friendly, that's good. And one thing led to another, and before too long, Dudley, it was before a surgical repair of his one eye that was bad. He couldn't see very well out of it. So he I don't remember which eye it was, but he tended to focus with that one good eye and hold you kind of intently in a gaze with that one good eye. And he navigated over to where I was leaning up against a truck, humming with music. And he said, well, what'd you think about work? Well, Miles had told me that they had the impulse to do work aimed and targeted at the people in southern Appalachia. Engaged. Now, southern Appalachia, near Knoxville, is one of the places where the Ku Klux Klan was founded. That's, Mo is the chairman of Highlander now, but it's kind of peaceful over there now, as I understand. But
yeah, it's passive aggressive.
But Miles said that they were trying to address those people. So Dudley asked me, well, what did you think about work? I said, well, as I recall, now memory is a faulty too, we know this, but you may remember it differently. But what I remember is I said something like, well, from what I understand about what y'all do, y'all got a lot of potential Klansmen in your audience. And frankly, I didn't see anything in the piece that would make a potential Klansman less likely to be a Klansman after he saw the piece than he would have been before. Now, I had some experience working with white people. And I knew that this kind of aggressive, though polite response had a tendency to push white people up against the wall. And I like to get them there and stick little needles in, hold them like specimens to see what they would do. Dudley didn't miss a beat in the conversation. He said, well, what do you think we ought to do about that? Well, we wasn't planning to do shit. I just came to see what they was doing. And that's what started the conversation that we continue to this day in one way or another. That's how it started. It's not necessarily what started. It's how it started.
Let me pick it up from there, if I may. And fast forward to sort of Junebug Jack. So what we decided to do was visit each other. And John would come up, start playing for our white audience, and we go down. We were all white company, all black company. We just started changing out, getting to know one another, hanging out. Audiences getting to know John in Central Appalachia, vice versa. So that's how we started, and then we just, all of our work is this iterative process of not like this play and then that's it. We were always into process. So we began, John would come up and do a performance, just John. Next thing you knew, half the evening would be John performing, and then we'd get up and do something with him, trade off. Then before you knew it, was saying, well, maybe we ought to take that little thing we did and script it, you know, make it a little more formal, work it out. We'd do that, put that on. So it was always this iterative, always also this kind of hanging in the broader community. So it was never just about making a show. So like we spent a lot of time in Atlanta together at the time with Roots, and that's when John and Ed Brown taught me the details, the fun details, and so forth of the civil rights movement around cooking night after night of just out barbecuing. And they'd spin the stories, and I'd listen and tell a few, drink beer, cook. So it was always this bigger immersion. But to get really to fast forward to the Junebug Jack, so we'd been evolving this for years. We've been, working 10, 15 years, you know, all this. So we had a lot of background in it. And for me, Junebug Jack was very successful to the point that we were able to take it. And let me tell you just a bit about that. We began by making the play, and it was this broad historical sweep about race and class coming out of these two experiences. And as you know, our image for this intercultural or cross-culture work is the image of a bridge. That Junebug's got to have a big, deep piling on one side. We got to have a piling on the other side, deep in our own culture, and that's what makes the span of the bridge able to hold up, not collapse. And so we're working on that span, right? And so in a way, I would say that neither Junebug nor Roadside fell into, well, you could misunderstand what we meant by Appalachian nationalism. So we were not, what we were trying to do, and it came up through Highlander in the Central Appalachians, was some of the same thing it seemed like black folk were trying to do with the arts movement in the South and with story and music, was get this sense of I am somebody. So people were not the white people in Central Appalachia were not feeling very good about themselves by and large. And so this was a whole kind of cultural revival that we were part of. And so it wasn't like we had it all together psychologically, and by God, now we could separate. It was actually the flip. We had all kinds of problems and not a sense of we are somebody. So that's where that impulse came from. But we were quickly interested, once we were working on that and establishing that, we were quickly interested in this idea of collaboration. So it was never to just go, create a hell of our own. And this is interesting because from a historical point of view, from at least as I read it, what you have is the beginning, probably you could mark it with the assassination of King, though it, you could say Malcolm, you could say Medgar Evers, you could go anywhere with it. But you have this trend of everybody breaking out of the center into their own corners. And it is very, and this is something that then becomes very manipulated politically right up to Karl Rove, who is, of course, the master at divide and conquer. So right after, at some point King, I'll just take King for example, he was all about this bigger circle. So was Malcolm when he came back. And it was all about this hoop, the interconnective, what could happen if people could get together and work things out. And you have this counterforce, the force of privilege and power, wanting to never let people get together, because if they get together, the power base is lost because they're a small minority. And they'd be overwhelmed. I mean, it's like we say in the play, when we're in Junebug Jack, if the poor white people and the black slaves could have ever stopped worried about their own little heads getting cracked and look at the big picture, it had everybody in it, they were, at what, a ratio of 1,000 to 1 to the power. It just could have almost blown it off. So you got this historical trend which is really pushing, the power base is pushing people into their own little business. So we were a counter trend to that. So we created this play, Junebug Jack. Now, as you'll see in the script, it has this broad, what's interesting to me dramaturgically about it is has this broad historical sweep. In other words, it is not a tightly constructed play in the Western European model, and where you just concentrate the action, you concentrate the psychology, you have this real drama between characters. It's not that at all. It's this broad historical sweep that begins with the way the Scots-Irish white people got here and the way slaves got here. That's what it opens. And it goes all the way up to Vietnam. And the characters are these mythical characters, Junebug and his counterpart Jack in the Appalachian culture. Jack's the trickster figure. Junebug is the trickster figure representing common wisdom of people as that. So anyway, so you got this broad sweep of history. So the play is never going to make it at the Manhattan Theater Club, right? Or wherever. I mean, it's just not their thing. But what we were trying to do, the play was not the whole deal. See, the whole problem is with that sort of narrower, or that we were in opposition to, still are, is that the whole moment of transformation occurs in the auditorium. We never believed that. I mean, you can have catharsis and so forth in the theater, in the auditorium, but it's not the only place. Every artist knows that. The catharsis, the high point of this race piece could occur today. And after that, it could be, fulfillment, doing stuff. But you never know where the major thing's going to happen. Artists know that. And so we know that, why can't audiences be involved in that same thing was our premise. So anyway, we got this broad piece of theater. And our trick became, how in the world do we get black and white working class people to come in to see this play? since they don't go out together and they don't go to the theater. The theater has basically become an upper middle class economic deal, right? So and what we wanted to do was bring that audience together. It was critical. We already knew that. Roadside had already decided it was not going to play for upper white audiences. We had more work than we could do. We could have franchised a company and just made money, and we just decided we weren't going to do that because it was corrupting the art. Because all the art's coming out of a whole nother history, politic, whatever. So, and as a performing artist, as you know, you start playing to the audience. I mean, I could take the most radical piece of work, and after 3 months of you performing it for the powerful elite, you wouldn't recognize what you were doing. I mean, it might be a lot of the same lines, but you couldn't hold the edge. I mean, unless you just became an automaton, and you know. So we were already on that. So that was a hard thing to figure out, how to get a working class black and white audience to come to the professional theater, particularly since and it's really, I think, important for you all to have a marketing plan, know how you're gonna, where the economy is, right? So our economy was through these presenters, and these presenters are used to bringing in that white upper middle class audience, maybe a little sprinkling of people of color, but not really, upper white. So that's where our economy was. That's who was sort of paying the bills. So, but we'd already sort of solved that problem by saying we'll only work with you type of presenters if you will agree to diversify your audience. That's what we're good for. And we knew how to begin doing that. But with this piece, Roadside didn't, and with this piece we had a higher challenge, how to get these two audiences together. What we hit on was this ecumenical choir, so that every community that we went to had to put together, as part of the contract, a choir that was drawn from different segments of the community. And it would be multiracial choir. So it'd be women's chorus, it'd be from a black church, from a white church, 3 or 4 people, and they would get the music and they would start practicing it. And somebody from Junebug, John, was saying he thought Kenny Raphael did it, some, Michael Keck. If they got stuck, we could shoot somebody in on the phone or in person to help them. But so it was all this local organizing happening as part of the contract. So all these people are learning this music, and they get so excited in the community because they'd never sung together. They segregated. Their voices had been segregated. Now, we weren't saying anything about we're going to make racial peace or any of that. We're going to come together to sing for this play. And these are all singers. Hey, this is my opportunity. I might go to Broadway from here. People had whatever idea they had, but they were into it. So then they get singing and working on the music, and this new sound it was new music, and new sound would come out, right? And that got everybody, that got all the singers jazzed up, and then the buzz go into the community and so forth. Anyway, cut to the chase, then I would come in a few days before and stage this community choir into the performance, not just with the singing, but also, with some lines, and then we'd block them all in. These are all volunteers, so we were working late at night. I didn't get off work till 5:30 or 6, but we'd do it, and they were having a ball. And of course, once they had this common task and this common joy, really, of singing, then they started beginning to know one another. So then they started talking, and some friendships got made. And every time, I know with this church business, every time before we'd go on, we'd have to have the prayer circles. Some minister in the group, we'd hold hands, and that wasn't exactly Junebug or Roadside's thing, but we were for the cause, and we'd pray hard before we went on the stage, and we hit the stage. Now, of course, what happened is every church had to send its people to hear its people, right? And then the community came because something new was going down. So suddenly you got really big audiences that had never been in because they owned a piece of it, right? They owned a piece of the performance. That's why they were there. And then a curious thing happens. Once you feel that ownership, then you don't have to worry and fight for that. And what you get into is appreciating the other. And that's what happens. So then, you know, the church people, they knew their music and they were proud of it. But what they really they get clapping for was the other thing, you know, the other thing that they hadn't heard. So things would loosen up. So then the next piece of it, so you got this wind in, you got this moment of performance. And then the next piece of it was to take, and this was the piece we could never fully enact, was to take that next step, which would be a series of community story circles dealing with the issue of race and class. But that pump had all been primed. People, I mean, we did story circles, but we could never do them long enough and iterative enough to make the community story about itself change. So what we were trying to do, the theory was that the change about race and class had to occur in particular places and communities. Not that Alex Haley's roots wasn't important, you know, that's the meta-narrative and so forth. But we were trying to work in particular communities. And with that lead-in, the people were just right on to race and class because they had seen this broad historical play and they had been able to read their own story into it. In other words, because the play was not tightly constructed between this character, you know, Bruce and I going at it, it was broad, they were reading throughout their own story into it. So that was the structure intentionally. And so when we sat down in the circles, I mean, these stories about race and class just, I mean, they were so moving. And that would then, from those stories, if we were performing the next night, those stories would inform our performance. So it was iterative on the stage as well. And that would teach us, that was how we were also, because we were participating, I mean, you participate. That's how we were also learning about race and class. It wasn't like we knew the answer or had worked it all out.
So you did story circles after the performance?
Right. And what sometimes right after and next day, but what needed to happen, what I'm saying is, yeah, and do keep pushing if I'm not clear, what needed to happen is that process needed to go on for months in a community as they just continued. And see, what made the story circle so interesting, you'd take a racial incident, say 2 weeks ago at the high school, right? And we're all sitting here. And I never heard, you know, the principal's, what it looked like from his point of view. And suddenly I'm hearing that. And I'm also hearing, you know, what your kid experienced going through it. And so, like, you get in all these perspectives, and you know the story circle methodology, you got to listen. So suddenly this new story about race and class in the community starts to get built. And John was saying earlier, you know, I don't know, memory's a tricky thing, he said. I don't know if this is how you remember it. But it doesn't really matter because the story John told about our meeting has become the narrative of what happened in our meeting. So I say, yeah, that's the story too. I don't have a dissenting narrative. And that's the story. And we found this time and again, Ron Short wrote this play called South of the Mountain based on a family story. Family had been telling the story for 30 years. But the play became the family narrative. You know, they just took over it because it was better constructed and so forth and tighter. And so they now just sort of recite the play as a family narrative.
So how did you guys evaluate, or did you evaluate if this was successful? Like, it got to the point where you knew what needed to be happening, you were doing it, you knew it needed to go on for months, you say you didn't quite get there. What were your means to evaluate if what you were doing was successful?
Well, I'd say, one, we couldn't get there because it turned out we couldn't find a commitment on the part of communities that were interested in seriously dealing with race and class over a period of time. That's why it stopped. The reason we knew it was working was because of what happened with the choirs and the excitement there, what happened in the auditorium with all these people, and what happened in the story circles. I mean, just the content and the emotion in the story circles was clearly on point of what we were trying to do. So it was, by my lights, it was successful up to the point where we could take it. What we were unsuccessful with doing was securing the support and the communities to carry it forward. And, you know, that could have been a fault of our organizing or something. But that's where it stopped.
You talk about the economy of it, and you know, I mean, I don't know what the economic situation was then, you know, as far as what you guys were charging for the work that you were doing, what type of presenters you were going after, you know, what type of space did it have to go up in, what were your needs as you came into the process, and how did that dictate what communities you could go into?
Well, at the stage of the process that Dudley was just talking about, we were doing this performance with like 6 people, and Dudley normally was there, and we normally had to have a technician there, so it was at least 8 people on the road. That set the terms of the economy. The idea was not just to get there and get back home, but for the company to realize something that would permit them to carry forward. I don't remember what the numbers were, but it became pretty daunting for a small community. And that, the subsidy for this kind of work, we tried to find subsidies we actually, through Roots, created a couple of programs intended to subsidize such work. It got to be problematic in Roots because people who weren't trying to do what we were trying to do felt like those programs that we went out and raised the money for and directed to Roots were serving too narrow an interest. And
Would that be the tour?
the touring program became the institutionalization of it.
So interesting.
Yeah.
There are big
We also had the
conversations
same
about
problem
tour.
with American Festival. We were raising money for that, and people thought that it was being too narrowly applied.
What year was it that you guys were making this work?
Oh, through the 90s. But like I said, you just can't, we're in a completely changed world now. There are no art presenters even taking any kind of chance on the scale that we were working now for this alternative work. Then it was led by really the bully pulpit of the NEA in this sense of democratization of art. So we were able to get foundation support, etc., to supplement. I mean, there was no way a ticket price was going to pay for this. You know, tickets for our work, I remember, you know, it was like $25, $30, $40 a ticket if you really factored it out.
Right.
But, and that was always a concern for us of how do you get the people you're serving to pay for it, you know, and not have this intermediary of foundations and so forth and so on. So we, you know, but there was an economy, and we were taking advantage of that economy. And it was a way to get to the communities. And like I said, as soon as our deal with the communities, it was, we're going to take your money and we're going to insist that you open it up to the whole community. And that was the deal we came with. We were going to take all your money and you got to open it up. And
Could you name some of the presenters? Could you name some of the presenters that you worked with that are still around, and some of the ones that you worked with that are not around?
well, I would say that we work with the big presenter in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I'm sure they're around, and probably what they're doing now is bringing traveling Broadway shows in. We were working with a number of little presenters in Louisiana, and I'm sure some of those have fallen by the way. We were also looking to work with churches, you know, so it didn't have to be the formal arts presenter like in Portsmouth.
Yeah, Arnie Molina,
Yeah,
he presented it a couple of times.
yeah,
Um,
and he's still around.
Barely, no barely.
Bruce has one too.
A question is kind of epic and much more personal than about the work, but a comment about the presenter thing. What I thought was really curious is that you all were the catalyst to say diversify and change your audience, versus I think a trend that's happening nationally now is that presenters are seeking out some sort of novelty act or artist that they think will help them do that because they think that that's their only survival mechanism, but they're not really willing to take the kind of risk to do that. But my question is very personal for both of you as artists and as friends. That you know, I've heard that this kind of collaboration put a strain on your friendship at some point. And I think it's curious that I heard this kind of anecdote about, Baba, when you met Dudley, that was your response to the work. This is what I see in the work. And Dudley, your response was, what are we gonna do about it? And it's kind of it's your work kind of thing. Obviously, through your artistic collaboration, you transcended that and you became a we that started doing something about some issues that were important to both of you. Do you feel like that's happened in your relationship as artists and as men, that divide was crossed and transcended, that the pronoun of you or you has become a we and survives as that?
Well, I would say at a personal level, I consider Dudley one of my best friends in the world. Since we first met, actually, that first night, you know, if you will accept a metaphor of love, you know right away whether you like somebody or not. It's a question of practicality of whether you can work out a way to maintain and build and develop a mutually productive relationship. But there's never any question about our friendship throughout all of this. At the same time, there's never been any question, but that because we are friends, it doesn't stop racism from working. And because we even share a broad philosophical, political perspective, it doesn't stop the social historical circumstance in which we have grown and lived. Doesn't stop it from happening. You can take it as a metaphor of the relationship between men and women. Just because we desperately and profoundly love each other and commit to each other for our life's development, it doesn't mean that the problem of the oppression of women has stopped operating, or that it doesn't also operate in our relationship. You know, Bert, my wife, automatically goes to cook when she's here. Now, as many of you know, I enjoy cooking and consider it a vital part of my personality. But somehow I'm treading in her territory when I get into her kitchen, you know? And so it's operating, you understand what I'm saying? If I can jump to another example, Bruce, Nick, Carlton and Maurice and myself and some other people worked in this together to build this Katrina piece, which we toured and so forth. But there were a lot of racial issues. I mean, you can't talk about New Orleans without talking about race, because New Orleans is the only city in the country that's been like a black majority city since 1720. Until now, it's no longer a black majority city. An agenda that's been at work since 1720. Katrina helped them do it. And every time we raise the question, how do we deal with this racial dynamic? Because it's so damn complicated and interwoven with the fabric of our lives. After we make the big assertion, racism is wrong and it ought not to exist, we then jump to everything else. Oh, wait a minute. We haven't dealt with it just because we agree on that point. The way it operated for us, as you can tell, even if you just know Dudley a little bit, one of the richest synthetic minds, analytical and, you know, and although he pretends to be kind of country slow, everything is cooking and snapping all the time. And he gets a little impatient if people don't keep up with him. And people that I would bring along to Junebug who also didn't agree with me. You know, it's important. I don't establish it. And I think most of us who have leadership responsibilities in a group soon learn that you cannot make the group do what you believe and think what you believe. So I early on said, well, people have to believe what they believe and try to focus on the work together. But a lot of the people I brought to the conversation just had no interest at all in trying to work out a clear and honest evaluation of the way black people and white people work together. Many of them were nationalists, cultural nationalists, if they had been philosophical at all. Many of them were not philosophical only as a matter of convenience, because I would talk philosophy, they would say, you know, and pretend that they were being philosophical. So it got to, so as and I would say that there were a lot of people who work at Roadside who were in a comparable posture in regard to the leadership at Roadside. So that there's that makes for a multi-layered conversation every time the question cracks the door. And I can't tell you how many times I had to say to people, Ron is out of control. And I had to say, because Ron is also a very aggressive thinker. And Michael Keck would say, why do you stand by and let him do that? And Ron and Michael were the tightest friends in the group now. It's interesting. And so, I mean, and so for time and time again, the examples of this effort to break through and be honest with each other and confront these problems in a frank and direct way, which, I mean, a part of what people who take the leadership of socially significant efforts almost they learn. It's been my observation. I don't know whether it's accurate or not, but I believe that we learn how to set our personal concerns aside in favor of the work that is considered to be more important than any of our concerns. And when, and sometimes when people who are following in this kind of role look at the leader as somebody who's been personally well served by this stuff. And in fact, my experience has been just the opposite. The leader is the one who sets the most of his or her stuff aside. You know, it's one of the prices of being a leader in a group like, in a function, social change related thing. You know, you can't do it if you put your personal stuff in front. You have to put your personal stuff way back here. I've lost 3 marriages on that basis. No, 2, only 2.5. I'm in my 3rd and a half now, so, and I don't intend to lose this one.
Deli, do you want to address that question as well?
Well, I agree with what John said, and we made it through. First of all, there is that personal love that John, so that's the foundation. We made it through the creation of the play. So, and he was just explaining to my delight how that played out. But we made it through there. The larger question of race and class was never going to be solved by that theater group or by John. We can't solve that until the society solves it. We have to, we can't, it wasn't to us. We couldn't possibly do it. How we were working on it was with the community. And as the community taught us, as the stories taught us, we would be part of the solution. And we would be getting a new narrative. Look, you know, it's like, for me, you go into a community, what's the narrative that's there about race and class? You know, every community's got a narrative about race and class. All we were trying to do was surface it through this work. So, and we were trying to bring people a very opposite. We were talking about the Klan had acquaintance who runs the dry cleaner in Greenville, Tennessee, right near Knoxville. And right before the Obama came in, and the Klan came in with their uniforms. They wanted them all dry cleaned. And this guy's, I don't know him, but know him from a friend. This guy's wife's from the north. Said, why in the hell did you agree to clean those uniforms? He said, because I want my business to not be burned down overnight. So, I mean, the whole thing, just as you said, is there. Anyway, what we were trying to do, it was bring all elements of the community together. We knew that for this thing to be solved at some point, we had to get that Klan perspective in the circle. So that was, I mean, that was the ambition of what we were doing. And what distressed us to no end throughout our work was seeing this turn inward to just what John said, to me, the artist. I'm going to solve this. If I can only be real with my brothers and sisters at the Alternate Roots annual meeting, then we can solve racism and classism right here at Roots. And we never believed it. It was a structural issue, and we could never get a systemic issue. We could never get our point about it. Roots, you are never going to solve this problem. And so the moment, I mean, I remember the clear moment when Roots, which had all, the push that we founded it on was this broad involvement of the community. So you get somebody who's, you know, hates white people in that circle with somebody who hates black people. I mean, that's what we were, but we do it in a way that you can hear. So that's what we were going for, and I can remember this moment at Roots at one of the performance festivals. When we looked around, we said, damn, Roots is now just performing not for the community, but for each other. There's nobody in here that isn't part of Roots or a friend of a rooter or an aspiring artist. Where are the people, you know? Where's the guy who's working construction? You know, where's the janitor? And that was like, I mean, for me, that was like, that's gone. I mean, in terms of doing the kind of work we were interested in.
Be necessary to try to express those narratives to find out how to we, even on this very interpersonal level, transcend this kind of glass ceiling.
I don't know. My view is that social, historical, political, and economic problems require social, political, economic action to advance. I don't think you can make a straight line between the individual and the collective. It's like you can't make a straight line between sugar and cake. You gotta mix it with eggs and milk and et cetera, and you got to bake it. And in the baking, something is transformed. And you can't go to the cake and work backward to sugar and eggs and milk, and can't do it. Because that baking is an essential and transformative part of the process. So, and you know, I keep coming back to the metaphor of the relationship between men and women. You know, there is no way that I can see that women through their acts, or men through their acts together with women, can, as individuals, take the responsibility for changing. You find yourself changing the social phenomenon. You find yourself that's what, in my opinion, lies at the basis of the phenomena that in art was called absurdism. You know, because you come to absurd conditions, absurd arguments, because it's absurd. You know, the social and historical circumstance. Racism served to create the class of people who were required for the economic development of the New World, which itself was a product of colonial expropriation. Now we want to unexpropriate all that history and act as if, oh, it ain't my fault. Well, it's not your fault. But what difference does it make? You know?
Because the institution is already there.
It's there. And we gotta come up with broad political programs that will address the situation as it now exists. We gotta organize campaigns, we gotta, et cetera, and we can't do it by ourselves. We need individually to understand what we're trying to do. But we also need to understand it's not our action that will be responsible for changing it.
So why organizationally did you stop doing the work?
I didn't stop.
Okay, I'm asking as a partnership. Was there a decision to say that
Well,
Junebug Jack doesn't go on? Or
Well, we don't stop
economics?
working.
Mhm.
You know, I claim some of the ownership in the work that Duff is doing now. Don't need to be recognized for it. I just claim it because I said, I had some impact on the niggas thinking. You know, he's got it going. And he can claim what I do. You know, whether we're doing it immediately or not. Just like I claim, perhaps arrogantly, you know, what you guys are doing. You know? I said, now they got it. You know? And I don't even know that that was I didn't at the time know it was my intention to have that impact, you know what I'm saying? So, but I think this is such an important point, that social conditions, historical conditions, broad economic conditions, which have impact on individuals, are not available to individuals in the reverse. We gotta live and work our way through these new conditions.
So what is the artist's role in that? I mean, because I think as artists we tend to romanticize about our role is in that we can induce that change. So what is the artist's role in that? In the creation of their work that's meant to speak about that, and our individual role towards each other in creating that work?
I think that's a big discussion. Everybody needs to
In your
participate in.
experience then, what was how did you see then, or how do you see now, your individual role as an artist to do that?
Well, it's a big discussion. First of all, we were definitely putting our hearts and minds into the script. We were definitely suffering. Our relationship continually suffered from racism and classism. I mean, it didn't even, I mean, not only in a, some sort of personal way. I mean, I'll give you an example. We'd be off somewhere touring, and I'd be following behind John into some grocery store to buy some beer. And I'd be 5 feet behind John, and the white guy selling the beer wouldn't even look at John. Look at me, what you want? I mean, you get, all that is there. You don't have to get into that. But, and when we made Junebug Jack, we were wrestling as artists, personally, with personal stories about what went in there. But at some point, if you think that's the whole enchilada, as John is saying, then we disagree. And you can get into this idea that I'm hearing it sort of come up, that our relationship suffered some rupture. All that happened with Junebug Jack was that we couldn't go any further with it. The communities would not. We couldn't find the mechanism. So so what we did was backed up and started another project together. So we didn't have any, there was no cataclysmic thing. We just couldn't push there. But the point for Junebug Jack, for me, in this circle, is that I think we figured a lot of things out with that play that we were never able to fully test. And we each have these stories, this narrative in our heads about race and class, and that composite makes the community narrative, and the community narrative then becomes a sort of a meta-narrative that you actually have to disaggregate the meta-narrative back to the individual. In other words, the meta-narrative gets this power that you have to then say, damn, how did that thing get there? Well, it got a little pinch from you, a little pinch from you, a little pinch from me. And the combination, kind of something like the bacon thing happened, and the whole thing, the cake rose. And so we we were deflating that so that we could then pick it apart into disaggregate it into the individual narratives. And then we could begin talking to one another again as human beings outside of the narrative. And the theory of change was that we got Obama now, right? And he is creating a new narrative about race in this country, a meta-narrative. But we don't think that's going to stop the dry cleaner taking the Klan uniforms. That narrative has got to be changed in community by community by community.
Let me ask you one question. We've got about 10 minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
So didn't you also work together on Promise of a Love Song?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that was another collaboration that also involved Pregonis.
Right.
So how did the addition of Pregonis, which is another community, cultural community, to that project, was it something that you all saw a need to do? Was it something that kind of just happened organically? and what were, how did it expand, and just how did that whole thing change the dynamic?
Yeah, we've been working together, and so in a whole round robin, it was always this image of trying to create a public common space, get out of our corners. So that process had been happening organically as well, that we'd been trading around in our communities, just trying to say, hey, South Bronx, why don't you come meet some white people? Hey, South Bronx, why don't you meet these Southern black people? Hey, Whitesburg, why don't you meet some people from the South Bronx? So it's a lot about exchange and just building a base for some people knowing people who are different. And so that had been going on for years. And then we decided we were going to make a play together. And the idea of the play came in in a dream Rosalba had about love stories. So that was a very different a kind of approach to what we'd been doing in Junebug. So that was a focus on the play experience itself. It didn't bring in community choirs, and it didn't have story circles. So it wasn't. It never got to the point of the ambition of community change that Junebug had. It was more about the aesthetic experience of the play and how this theme of love could contribute to the race class issue. But Junebug was an organizing effort and an artistic effort both. And it was as much organizing, but it was 2/3 organizing, if you count story circles as organized. Now the story circles would have eventually gone into performance. I mean, we would have, that's our methodology of how you take the story circles and then make that into performance. So there was always going to be a performative element because it's just a powerful way for the broader community to get tuned into the story. Then you got to go back and with that wider audience, get their story in the next production. It's widening circles. That was the theory. So, it's pretty clear about the theory, I think. And what I always said is if we had been able to find a foundation or some money that was really interested in dealing with the issue of race and class, they would have given us a carte blanche to just go do the show. Because until we found out it wasn't working, because it was working every time for, in this incremental way. I mean, it was just working every time. But, you got to realize, it's a huge step for a community just to bring everybody together when nobody's been together forever. I'll tell you one quick story. Robbie Mccauley, who we worked with over the years, who's a director, writer, performance artist, she grew up in the South, a military family. And her father had to, I think he was in 3 different branches of the service, Bruce, because he kept punching out his commanding officer, and so he'd have to get in another one. And she'd never really crossed the Mason-Dixie line. She went to school, I think it was at Vassar, wasn't it, John? One of the sisters up there, and she had a white roommate. And she thought, damn, she couldn't understand what's going on with her white roommate. And then they got along great, and the white roommate didn't seem to be concerned about any of the thing, particularly didn't seem at all concerned that she was black, and she was very concerned she was black. And she came to this realization that in the South, black and white people thought about each other every minute of the day. And in the North, at least in her experience there, it had just been, we're all the same. I don't know, we're all the same. You're me and I'm you. And it was like really discouraging to her.
In your dreams, buddy boy.
So, you know, that's what we were, it's those kind of images that we were thinking on. Let's get the detail of your racist story in the circle, because it's there. Let's get it out. And we tried to do that in our own personal creation as well of the play, but we just knew it couldn't stop there.
This is a big historical moment that we're living through. You know, when the foundation of Western culture is being challenged because it's reached a point where it can no longer advance in anything that can be imagined as a productive way without confronting this limitation. Western society is founded on the expropriation of the fiscal, geographical, human resources of the rest of the continent, of the planet. Conquest is an acceptable way to develop. It has the whole of the human society. The biggest part of the last 2,000 years probably is the contest between the developmental modalities of the East and the West, both based on conquest. And if you win the fight, it is presumed that you and your culture are superior to the people who you defeat in battle, and therefore have the right to whatever they had. You know? And if they object, it is mine not only right, but my responsibility to kill them. You know? Because they're inhibiting our development. You know? Well, this technology that's been built on that basis, you know, that we use all the time and depend on for survival, because even the good subjects or slaves or whatever the term, serfs or whatever the term is, the good ones are rewarded for kowtowing, you know, and they get a small piece, but a piece of the action, you know, and now the world is so full that it's clear that even we who suffer, I mean, again, the comparison to women is a good one, because you know, women immediately in America, American white women, immediately said, oh, it's terrible that those poor slaves have to be like that, you know, because we are like that. But as soon as the question comes, are you going to fight for our right to vote? Oh no. Oh no. We need the right to vote, but well, you're too, you know, to get it. And so it's a mess, you know, and the West cannot continue to develop like that. For among other reasons, other people in the world are saying no, you know. That the world can't develop like that because they're guilty of the same history. So we're at the point where either we have to commit to the historical struggle that would advance human development, or accept the limitation and die. And I don't think there's much of a choice there. We have to change this sucker. We have to. But we can't do it as a group of individuals. We have to organize. organizing is the only option. You know? And so, you know, we can't do it as a group of artists unless, as artists, we are also part of the organizing effort. That's my opinion.
It's right on time. So, people feel the need to take a quick break, or
I've been taking my breaks all along, so.
so we'll take 5 minutes and come back and we can flip it.
I understand, I think that the intent of what you're going to do is you want to also affect the bad effects of the tragedy of race and class. So what we were trying to earlier sort of lay out our theory of change, how we thought we were going to do that, what the theory of change was. So what are you all thinking the theory of change is for what you're going to undertake? In other words, how are you going to, how is what you're going to do going to be cut to this purpose of changing something? How you think you're going to do that?
I think one of the things that we're really trying to focus in on is the commonalities that we possess as human beings, as opposed to sections of culture, right? Use the sections of culture to analyze the commonalities that we have in this greater purpose of being human beings on this earth. And especially, I think, in the times that we have right now, we're looking not at only the economical, because we found out the economical does not work. Not in this structure like we're talking about, right? In this particular structure we have right now, economics does not work for everybody. It's not equitable. So to really focus and put the frame of reference, this is something personally, I hope it translates to the whole, but it has to be framed towards a survivability of humans on this planet. And I guess that's where the peace part comes in. Going from the race of the individual thoughts of people and cultures and sections to a more coagulated thought process of what we need as human beings. So I mean, that's and using the story circles and the process of dialogue to really examine those commonalities through our individual stories, right? Through the lenses of what we have as our individual baggage, to see how much we have in common with the person that has probably even the reverse effect of that baggage, right? But still the common ground that we're both there. You know what I'm saying? So we can examine the fact that we can't do it, like you said before, alone and not in silos. That right now is a time that if we're really talking about some transformation or really talking about a change in our processes of thinking, that it has to be from a human concept of living, as opposed to just getting a piece of a pie or just getting a piece of whatever it may be, sociology. I mean, as it relates to the social community, right? That we have to start thinking about these extortions of resources and the whole process of finitism, right? As opposed to being infinite thoughts that we all have of this thing and just keep on going and keep on going and keep on going. So it's really the framework of how those commonalities as human beings are the underlying transformation process, or the tools for transformation, is understanding that.
As far as the process, I think the process that we intend to have is to engage in community through the story circle process, through various workshop methodologies, to media, to extract the personal stories, and then be able to distill from that, like Marie said, those common pieces, so that what we're representing back to the communities are the pieces that will resonate across racial lines. So whatever it is that is put forward can speak to everybody where they're at, and within the process as well. That I think what we heard from Junebug Jack was that you guys would do that the work. I'm not sure how the creation of the work happened, but that the work would go into a community and be presented, and then there will be story circles afterwards. There was a way for the community to participate in it as part of the actual performance. We have similar thoughts about engaging the audience in the performance, both in the process of creating the work, in the methods of, you know, these going to, we've got scheduled to be here in New Orleans and Mississippi and Kentucky, hopefully, New York, Minneapolis, and getting a wealth of information and then bringing it back and then putting that in a format that also allows for community dialogue and community participation, community action to happen within the piece. So that the piece isn't, okay, we do the piece and then we stop and talk about it, but the voice of the community is a living organism that helps to transform the work on a day-by-day level. So the work as it's presented always has an energy of being new and dynamic and flexible.
Another thing that we're doing is that we're spending this year going to a number of different cities where we already know people in various organizations to host workshops, to gather some of these stories to help inform how we create the work. And when it comes time for next year and it's time to start traveling back to these cities, hopefully with those connections that were made, those organizations can then use this performance and this next workshop when we visit again as an organizing tool.
And the sharing, there's a definite been a talk on a serious level, and this has happened with a couple of projects that we know of right now. I'm taking a model of something like 1,000 Kites and a number of other ones of seriously quantifying the methodology and explaining how this is done and how you can use whatever tools that are there as a means to continue the work you're already doing or to begin the work when you leave, but not allowing the success of the work to be reliant upon our presence in that place. And I think the other one is we've talked, and we're primarily a white and a black company, but that we wanted to, I feel like at this moment, generationally, multiculturalism is a bigger thing and is going to be a bigger thing. It doesn't mean that black and white racism has gone away, but that when we go to a place like New York and we just mention that, you know, if it's just a black-white thing, New York doesn't want to get down with that right now because they are coming with so many racial issues that cross so many cultural lines. And I feel like generationally, this is our moment right now to continue to bring in strands of different races, not just black and white. I feel like we have to work from our very deep personal experience here living in the South, but that our effort is to go to Minneapolis and New York and Los Angeles to have these dialogues, to try to hear what are the other dialogues about race that are happening beyond our experience.
Of white, black, in the South.
And as far as what you guys said about the economy of the presenting world, one of our theories of change is that we're not going to do this piece with the traditional presenters. It will not be limited by what we do with regards to just the people who would traditionally present our work. And that we will work with the networks of the people that we have, but we'll make a piece that does not have to be in a theater at all.
And that kind of goes back to Uprooted. We had this show that had to travel with like 14 people, something like that, like 12 in the cast, and then Roscoe. And
$36,000 a week.
Yeah, so I mean that just made it economically impossible to do this in alternative spaces and just to get groups, very small groups to get together to bring us there. And so very early on we said, well, there's just 4 of us, and so that makes it a whole lot more feasible.
I'm a little confused about the point that I heard you making, that the frame is not going to be the frame of black and white people trying to work out something. Mm-hmm. And yet, that's who you are. So how can you access what you have not experienced?
Can I clarify?
Yeah.
We've been very clear on the personal, professional, artistic level, that we are interested in exploring the stories that affect our lives personally and our lives as artists and the lives we're living in this specific moment where we are. I just wanted to make the point that we also are attuned to, I feel like we've been very attuned to the fact that this is, in this moment, not just a black and white thing in this moment in history, and that if we don't try to engage other communities who are themselves very deeply experiencing the issue of racism, in just in terms of listening and hearing what are the issues, that we would be giving a limited view of what is occurring here.
And more than, I was gonna say more than that, I mean, not just listening, but also providing space within the framework of the piece for those stories to exist. Not us trying to tell someone's story, but how do we use alternative methods in the space to allow people to tell their own stories. So there may be a video that may come up of someone, from the Asian Arts Initiative in Philadelphia that is telling the story from their unique perspective that I can't tell.
I think beyond all that is the fact that what we're trying to do is be transformative in the way to where I didn't want to, me personally, from the beginning of it, I was talking about, we don't want to talk about the past, even though we may make reference to the past. We're talking about the vision for a future. So the whole thing is about actually actualizing our human beingness as opposed to any culture, even though the culture cannot be escaped, right? But the focus of it is about the humanness of all of us and how that transfers from just looking past all those things. So I mean, even when talking about the dichotomy of black, white, as we have been told, you know what I'm saying, and everything that we look at, finding your place in that black, white, dichotomy, as knowing that it's still a sphere, right? That you have two poles, but it's still a sphere that encompasses everything. So really kind of reaching towards that in the frame of reference of how are we going to survive on this earth if we still talking about black and white? And really, really pushing that as being the antithesis of what we're trying to do is, if the frame of work will be the black and white, then we already put the box in there. We already got a box created to where that's the frame of it.
Is that clear up what you're interested in, or you want us to? Are you looking for something else?
It's another one of those big questions. I mean, I know we can't exhaust it, but I guess my opinion is that universality is only accessible through the particular.
Right.
In other words, if I start out trying to love everybody, I'm going to exhaust myself before I get 1/10 or 1% of them. But if I love you, I get to everybody automatically. You see what I'm saying? That you can only you cannot embrace the whole world. You can only embrace somebody you care about. And in that relationship, the whole world is represented in some kind of valid way.
I guess we also need to be clear too that this is not a narrative.
It's not a narrative.
That what we're working on is not a narrative.
It's not a play.
Yeah, well, that doesn't matter to me. It's like people will construct their own narratives, as they do anyway, anytime they hear a story. It's not.
But I think we're not saying different things, because that's what I'm talking about. Is the particular is the need to survive on this planet. That's the particular in each one of us. Is the need to be able to survive, and the need to be able to get past all this stuff that we're talking about. I think that's the particularness of it. I mean, the fact that each individual has their own story, right? Of course. But each individual is connected to the next individual, and the fact that we're being held down by our particular thought of thinking that we can't get past it. So it's a conundrum, you know what I'm saying? When you think about it, it's really, but it's still a particularness. It's not making it vague. I don't think it makes it vague. Me particularly, go.
Can I just add to what you're saying? I think what, John, maybe you're getting at is that the fact remains that you're two black men, and two white men who are looking at these issues. And so I think there's a way to talk about other races and multicultural and reach out to all sorts of folks, but that you're still looking at it through the lens of black and white men who've decided to work together. And so I think, is that maybe what you're talking about, that being particular, and that the intentionality behind that, and just, and of course you're saying, you're not speaking for anyone else, but you want to include other voices, but then maybe it's about how these different issues affect you as black and white men living in today's society.
I think that's first and foremost, that has to be the central, the thing that keeps us together is us working through our own real stories and real issues. What we're also saying is that we're not going to limit.
Yeah, it's not limited.
We're not going to limit the work to just this reference point.
Lisa Mount wrote a letter of recommendation to the NEA when we wrote the grant that you all might have read, that took a pot shot at the man thing in the letter, which was, she said, this group of men is getting together as men often do. It's kind of in parentheses. And I didn't think she needed to put it in parentheses, because if it's intentional, and I have to say right now in my mind, I don't just see this as a piece with men in it.
No.
But if it is intentional and it's exploring something,
Right.
then it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be really powerful.
But if we're not aware of it,
Right.
then it's problematic. I feel like it can be problematic that we are, and if we try to represent voices that are not our own, then it can get more problematic, because people can say, well, who are you as men to be talking about X, Y, and Z?
But this really gets back to the point, is that we're all human beings. And if we start framing this thing to where we're talking about a human being's relationship to this earth in the times that we're living, is where it's going to be more profound than anything else. Human beings. I'm talking about people who are trying to live without the imperialism, without the racism, without the hate, without all these different things. Human beings. Not a particular section of human beings, but a human being, which we all are. And I think, once we start raising that cap of thinking and closing our minds to these individual things we see as far as our physicalities, right? And really start getting to the essence of what we are here for, which is to try to live, right? We're on this plane to live. More than anything else, more than to dominate, more than to procreate, we're here to live, to exist. So if we cannot frame it to where we can be possible to exist on this plane, you know what I'm saying? That's where it really gets tricky to, okay, now what does that mean to a person? Well, food, clothing, shelter is what most people need. Those are the basic needs. You have other things that you need in this world, you know what I'm saying? But far as if we can frame this thing to where it touches everybody on those basic tenets of being able to exist, I think it's easier than what we think it is too.
Yeah, let me ask a couple of questions. I mean, first of all, my own bias is there is no, that just as John said, people will make their own narrative. We're the storytelling animal. I would argue it's our distinctive evolutionary advantage. And they take kids now, they did this experiment up in Boston where they would take kids just learning to speak. They put cameras in, and as soon as those kids were alone in their crib, they started telling themselves stories to try to make sense of what had happened with the adult world. I mean, and you're creating a narrative now. I mean, the sort of narrative I'm hearing is it's got sort of two sides to it. It's got an apocalyptic side. If we don't act as human beings in our common interest and our shared interest, then we're doomed. And the positive side of the narrative is that it's not all that great a stretch for us. That's what I'm hearing. That's the narrative I'm making. So my question is, how much to make progress on this issue of race and class? How much history has to be unknotted? How much history has to be? How much psychology has to be unknotted? So you can take it a personal history into one, psychology into the broader. In other words, how much is a function of really unknotting, like a backlash when we're out there fishing for perch or brim or something, the reel gets, how much of that has to happen? That's question one. Question two is, it sounds like the organizing model that you all are thinking about is that you will be working in these different communities and where you're collecting the story, and you want that community to somewhat autonomously get its own effort going on this, right? And that you will be a resource to it, a continual resource to it, but you want to be, to help spark it or be some part of a help to getting it started, and the community itself will then carry this on. So you get synergy, if you've got 6 communities working on it. And so there's the issue, there are just some practical things, how are you going to identify leadership in the communities? How are you going to stay coordinated so that all the communities are learning from each other? How are people going to sustain it economically? And so there's this whole community organizing model. And then I guess another question in that model is, how are you going to keep, we have a very particular organizing model, and a key part of it is every community wants to close down, to revert back to exclusivity. And to whatever, to exclude people. We've never been in a community of the thousands we've been in that was not exclusive. It didn't have a power base. So the question becomes then, how do you keep pushing the door open so that inclusivity becomes that you put a lot of energy behind inclusivity. And it doesn't really matter, you'll be starting with particular groups, it sounds like, and they will to different degrees be exclusive themselves, in the same way that alternate roots is an exclusive group. So those are just,
I'll take a stab at one or two of those.
Yeah.
I think the way that we have begun to identify leadership in the communities is working through the networks that we already are part of, first and foremost. So like NPN, we've identified some partners through that. The network of ensemble theaters, we identified partners through that. And also through a lot of the organizing work that we are part of with the Highlander Center and with the work that I do, connecting with, in each one of these communities, having both a partner that comes from the artistic world, and also a partner that comes from the organizing and activist world. So for instance, in Minneapolis, we're working with the Jerome Foundation, Illinois Savage, working with Pangea World Theater, and we're working with Main Street Projects, which is all about the work of bringing together and being advocacy for the immigrants in that area. So that's like those 3 partners, which they've heard of each other, but they don't work together. But they're in the same community and they share the same values. So part of the work that we have to do is to make sure that these folks know about each other, that they're working together and using this work as a way to bring them in a group together and begin working on something. In DC, we've got a number of Roots members there Abel Lopez, who's interested in the work, as well as people with the Hawa and other artists and people.
Hawa. They run an organization called One Common Unity, and they do youth organizing and organizing around issues of race and class. They're the people who host the Common Folk Awards in DC.
So, and same thing, with LaDon James and her work with the Algebra Project and the Center for Community Change, and
The Algebra Project?
mm-hmm. LaDon James, LaDon.
Yeah, I know LaDon.
Yeah, she's on the board of the Algebra Project, and also was it the National Organized Alliance, NOAA, in DC. So it's like trying to pull together artists and activists in these areas to begin these projects with us, so that we're using this project as a catalyst to get them working together in their own communities to begin with.
I think one of the dangers is that especially in the alternate roots world, a lot of artists mistake themselves as organizers. And I don't also often see organizers trying to mistake themselves as artists. And admitting that you are not a professional organizer, I think, is a key part for me. And bringing in those people that are doing the professional organizing in that community, and saying that one of the things I think people appreciate about the work that we do as artists is that it gives us a new way to not only dialogue and organize, but to see and hear these issues. And one of the strengths we have is that we are creators. But I think one of our weaknesses is to try to believe that that there's not an art to organizing as well. And that sometimes I've seen a lot of our efforts stop at that point of, now the work needs the push you talked about. Now it needs that final push to stay in a community for 3 months or to be there. So that one conscious thing that we've been trying to bring to the table is, who is the people that are doing the actual organizing within the community?
It sounds like partnerships sound promising. That's I just was talking to Eleanor, and sounds promising. I think that on the issue of artists versus organizing, I wouldn't erect a bright line. I mean, I think artists can learn to be organizers, and organizers can learn to be artists. And I wouldn't like to see that separation, because I think, again, that's moving into that corner, into our corners image. I mean, not every artist has got to be an organizer, not every organizer, it's got to focus, but you can do both. But one of the things that it seems to me is in this model is, how is this all going to stay coordinated? I mean, it strikes me as almost like a full-time job if you got this going in, say, 6 communities, of just keeping that almost like a circuit rider person, moving through the communities as an organizer, keeping it connected, and the learning, and then bringing it back. What's the thing you all need to do? 3 communities need X, so you all could, like, on demand create X. That's what we're doing in Kites. That's the model there. We hear from the community, and then we create it. We don't. So I would say, think about that coordinator role, and then just know, no matter how enlightened NPN or the individuals in those communities are, they're a very narrow community. I mean, that's my own feeling, because, the dominant image to me is this, of everybody in their corner, that people I've not seen any community in the last 30 years that hasn't factionalized to different degrees, but I just think that's a big thing. So on this other issue of how much, that question of how much do you feel like for change to occur, that one has to unknot history, unknot psychology. In other words, how much can a new day bypass the past?
You can't. There's no way to do it. There's no way to bypass anything. It's not about bypassing, I don't think. It's about actual, like I was talking last night. I truly believe, I don't know how many of us believe this, but there are gaps in information. And the gaps in information is what makes things comfortable for people, right? And I think if we fill in some of the gaps in some of this information, it's factual information, not stuff that I'm making up, or not stuff that we're going to be making up, but actually presenting facts that would join us on a common ground, because the fact is most of us don't know it. You know what I'm saying? So when you start kind of filling in those dots or connecting dots for people, dots that people don't have the time to think about because they're going through their ordinary day, or just don't have the resources to get hold of, or whatever the reason may be. I think that's going to do a lot of the work for us, because there's going to be a concern raised. You know what I'm saying? There are things that, if people knew about, they'd be like, what the fuck? That's what? And it would be across the whole room. I do it every time I go to a room and I mention something, they be looking like, what are you talking about, man? You know what I'm saying? And when I get through, they be like, I never heard that before. And the whole group is like that. You know what I'm saying? So that's the commonality that we're starting at, is a basis of not having reference or not having the information. And when you get the information, it changes, it's a light bulb that pops. Now, of course, some people, the light bulb is only gonna stay open stay on for 20, 30 seconds. Some people, it's gonna become the new basis of what they're thinking. But the thing now is that information is not being presented. So in the exchange is bringing information and getting information and making it relative to where they're understanding that it's all complementary or supplementary to a change in thought progression. And so I think as we do that, we'll find that it's going to be successful in just the interactions between just being in a new day now to where the information is even possible to be gotten. You know what I'm saying? We know stuff now that they've been doing for the last 40 years, and that's the historical context that you're talking about, of unknotting things and letting that information and those new facts that have been gathered be the thing that pull that rope out and straighten it out and see how long it ties to everything, right? So it's like, that's gonna be the focal point, is really, really blending in the community's knowledge with knowledge they haven't gotten, and really trying to explore alternate forms of media, alternate forms of resources for media, and really, really start banging our heads against this status quo of just being existent. You know what I'm saying? Which, everybody can just sit back and just kind of Cadillac, but they ain't gonna help nobody. Cadillac, just chill out. Just chill in your Cadillac like this. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, finish your point.
No, that's it.
I wonder if I could just ask a question about, sorry, I don't want to take up too much from what you used to ask the questions, but something that, so what you're talking about to me sounds like this kind of shared analysis that you're taking with you into community, this knowledge that you're trying to bring to communities. And I the question I thought of earlier when you guys were talking about Junebug Jack is, how much of that kind of shared knowledge did you have coming into communities? Did you have an idea of what you were bringing together, or did you discover that as you went along? Did you have a method of working together that was decided beforehand? How did that develop? How did that work? And how, I think that for me it seems like that'd be a helpful lesson in figuring out how you, even though you guys have worked a lot together, there's so much that you still don't, assumptions that you make about with the knowledge that you're bringing as individuals and as a group into a community. Does that make any sense? So I guess I'm curious about, how much of that was thought out beforehand, or is it more of a, did you play more of a role of a facilitator in communities? And was it more about, well, I'll shut up. You get what I'm saying.
So are you asking us a question?
I think so, yeah.
It's flipped again.
The play Junebug Jack had a historical analysis.
Right.
That's what the play was about. It's a musical, and it was done through entertainment, but underlying it was this historical analysis about the way race and classes operated. That's what we put out there. With the choirs, we got people to buy into the aesthetic first, the joy of singing, and then they got interested in the content. because the music was full of content. What they loved about the music is they could sing with a purpose, and that helped their singing. That helped the aesthetics of their singing because it had a purpose now. They believed it in a different way. So they liked that. And then we had the story circles, and the presumption was that the general theory of change in coming out of the Free Southern Theater, it's straight into Roadside today, is them with the problem got to be the generative base for the solution. Whoever's got the problem has got the solution, that we can't, and it's got to come from the knowledge of the community of the people. So that's the general theory of change. So, what I'm interested in is sort of the facts. So what would be an example of a fact?
Oh, for me?
Yeah, like you're saying, I like the idea of this introducing new facts, that we're behind the sort of the facts, but
I got 1,000 of them.
Well, give me a good one.
Give you one. The Sea of Plastic. You ever heard of Sea of Plastic?
Mm-hmm.
Have you?
Yeah, in the Pacific?
Yeah, in the Pacific Ocean. It's the size of 2 Texases now, right? It's another one supposed to be forming.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that's common knowledge, but if you break the Sea of Plastic down to the point of now you got all these seagulls that are part of an eco chain that doesn't affect black or white, but everybody within that spectrum, right? That are eating this plastic, taking it to the young and dying, right? And at the same time, the plastic that's being deteriorated on the top is floating down to the bottom or drifting down to the bottom. And it's replacing plankton, which was the primary food source for fish, as the primary food source. Just plastic is not a primary food source. So in 7 generations, all that fish is gonna be dead, right? So that's not a black and white problem.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? We have constraints on our thoughts about it because of our own factions of black and white, because most black folks, they just think about how to get by in a day, so they don't think about ecological things on the most part. I'm just saying, that's not on their radar. And then, a lot of white folks on the other end are so privileged that they don't think about it every day. So it becomes a commonality between those two factions because they don't know about it and they don't have that information, right? So that's just one. I got a million of them.
Another one we talked about the other day was the fact that we've been investigating some of these hate promoting websites about race and stuff on the web, and looking and really reading through some of these things. And Bruce was talking about making the point that about black segregationists and white segregationists meeting because they both had the same end in mind, and that a collaboration between them was necessary in terms of the methodologies they were using, because they both had, at the end of the day, they wanted the separation of the races, and looking at those really complicated points of racial history as well, and the nuance of that, and sharing and bringing to light some of those things that very much don't just allow people to say, this is a real easy, like as you would say, Dudley, a bright line that we can draw right here. Mm-hmm. But that it's nuanced, and there are social factors at play, there's economic factors at play, there's racial factors at play. So that was another example.
Yeah, and so it sounds like your facts are, in Junebug Jack, the play, we made this historical analysis. And it sounds like your facts are going to serve whatever you construct, the performative part of what you're constructing. I understand it's multimedia, maybe a menu, right? Whatever that event is, that's could somewhat be analogous to the role that the play played in our process. So then it becomes, if you look at our process, to go back to your question, it becomes, okay, the audience hears the facts, and then what is the process for them or the community to use those facts to investigate their own local life, their own inner life, and to begin constructing a different narrative about the future.
What was the process in you guys? The story circle? Mm-hmm. That was the process for the community.
Yeah, but our story circle also always has a performative element. So we'll sit in stories for a long time, and then somebody will say, well, let's maybe take these stories and put them into a community performance, just because that it freshens it. It's something new, different to do. Or let's take these stories and write 6 songs, new songs, out of these stories and go perform those. You know, so it's like putting something up in public. So, I mean, there's always that part that's just a lot of fun. And, you know, you can, I mean, you know, in Dayton, Ohio, we had 180 story circles going simultaneously in an iterative process. I mean, there were 3 in Jewish communities, and they were all, and it was just, you know, anybody could do it. The Jewish community just wanted to know more about their story. So, and they were hosted small in people's home, like 10 people, all fed into the historical society. Then people could make stuff out of that. There was a major play made from the big stage, and another play made from another, a dance made. You know, it just became a resource to the community. So you can do it at all sort of, you can really organize it. But yeah, that was our process. But you know, you got to keep changing it up, you know, to keep it interesting to people. You know, it's like we say, Carlton will find out when he comes to Apple Shop. Sometimes the Apple Shop thinks if it stares at a problem long enough, it'll go away, rather than doing any action. We just
And that's brilliant, Dudley. In this time frame that we're living in now, with the ability to, you know, the cell phone and all that interaction that the youth use, to actually start doing interviews like that, make a push for story circles with youth. You know what I'm saying? Doing digital, you know, your phone and text it. You know what I'm saying? Those are the kind of things that they're doing now, and that if we just try to get people into a captive space in this day and time, it's not the same thing with the youth generation, you know? And then to really push on that same thing that you're talking about, but push it to where, okay, I go and I have 5 friends, and we all take text, you know, take media of each other's story, and then take all the media and send them to a local place or a central place. That's brilliant, Billy. Thank you for thinking of that. No, it's the same idea. It's just the evolution of it.
That's right.
Same idea.
Yeah,
Same thing.
Well, this is asking this question that we asked about the thing that you said, because theater is a upper middle class, primarily white thing, and has not changed significantly in an audience base over the last 30 years. The container of the form has to be able to both advance your theory of change, but hold together the potential for a diverse group of people to come into the space to share in that. And I think generationally, right now, we are blessed with the foundation set in the last 30 years by many different people who explored their forms to certain ends, theater, music, etc., that we can draw upon that knowledge to say, how are we going to use what we know and from these forms to advance this idea?
And the technology that's present now too, as well.
One of the things that we've done,
I just didn't get that point.
The technology that's present in this day and age too, the tools that we have to explore those things that he's talking about.
So that
The use of those tools.
The ability to share stories, not only in person, but via video, via the web, via radio, is becoming easier and easier.
borrowing from the Junebug-A.B.E.E, I think me and Marisa, our process a lot is whenever we go to places to perform, we always use local musicians because it's too expensive to travel with the same group of folks all over the place, and it also always adds a bit of local flavor to the set that you wouldn't get if you always had the same musicians, and it changes it up and makes it new and relevant to the locale. And you know, it's very much like the choir thing of Junebug-A.B.E.E, and something we may want to look at how we incorporate that into the work.
I want to pick up one thing, ask a little bit. You were saying you really were going to look at all kinds of spaces, alternative spaces, people would say, and just John and I was talking. We were talking, and I was saying that, and to others, one of the, if you take the Apple Shop Theater which you all know, some of you know, how different that space is from the Indian Bottom Old Regular Baptist Church. And I mean, they're just night and day. The Old Indian Regular Baptist Church is in some ways, it certainly is as aesthetically pleasing as this very controlled space with lighting and so forth, with a big potbelly stove and so forth and so on, because there's been care taken. You know, you can go into a place and you can tell when care's been taken, when love's been put in the space, and you know, and so what I'm sort of getting at is a concern I have just about work in general is tapping the tradition and the traditions of a particular place. So whether it's a church tradition, like where we are, or whatever. So how are you thinking about these alternative spaces? And it goes to this audience issue, because I have, you know, Peter Brook wrote that essay, The Empty Space, which I thought it was absurd. I've never been in any space that is empty in my life. And so what's your sort of thinking about space? Maybe you haven't gotten to it, but it's not too early to even, before you get there to.
Yeah, I don't know that we've done a whole lot of thinking about it. The largest part of our thinking has been that we don't want to limit ourselves to traditional professional theater spaces. That if we want this work to really resonate, that we have to take it to the communities where people are. And that finding spaces that we could work in, whether it's a room like this at some school, or you know, an auditorium, or a community center, you know, what would the piece look like in those spaces? And it may not always look the same, but that the way that we can adapt the work to fit whatever the space that we need to be in. I mean, if other people have, I think that's the most that we've talked about.
I feel like when I go to someone's home, if I come to their home via the recommendation of someone, that's my intermediary to get into that home, that it makes a difference about my presence in the home.
Mm-hmm.
Because just to show up in a place where there is no connection, I think that's a very careful thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's the danger of people not knowing your work and you isolating people as well through what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But we have tried, I think, in terms of the spaces we've been approaching, to really mine our resources for who do we have that is a connection that will invite us and vouch for us into that community as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
showing up cold is something I'm not accustomed to in a community. And I think, I bet we could, but I think it's something to consider.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking last night, Wendy was talking about the bones, with some of you, the bones of our ancestors, Wendy O'Neill. Mm-hmm. And, you know, one of the things I'd say is that it would be useful to the community, whatever community you're in, to become more conscious of the space that they point you to or that they collaborate with. And we had this happen out in Shoto, Montana, because we're always looking for the space that can include the most inclusive space. So we hit on this park in the center of the city, and you know, everybody said, yeah, it's where everybody comes, all classes, races, and so we said, all right, we'll do it there. And of course, it turned out to be a Native American burial site, and the Blackfeet were just like, I don't think so. You know, that's been the worst space for us ever. Every time we walk by there, you know, it just, we don't like it. So, you know, communities, it's the sort of point that communities don't always have the answer. They have to discover it too. But I find space and Ngugi wa Thiong'o said that when he was doing his work in Africa, that the censorship was not of his word, but over his cultural protocols and the space. So that he always wanted to work in the round with a certain sort of cultural protocols about when things start, when they don't, fourth wall or not, you know, and that's where his work was censored. They would take his words, but they always wanted to fit it into another cultural norm. And it was censorship to him. I mean, he couldn't get his message at full force. They already co-opted it. I just seen it happen time and again. There's a play that came out of Roots with that was just, it was done in a room this size, and I thought I was going to have to leave at one point. It was about fundamentalism. Eddie Lee did it, and it's just so electrifying and so seemed at times profane. It's just very, very powerful. And it was out of his own story, family moving from the country, fundamentalist, to the first suburb and so forth, and preacher. And when they moved it to Actors Theater of Louisville as a big main stage production, they threw it back from the audience, put a big bunch of light and a whole set. It was just done like this. No props. They made a whole set, and so what you ended up doing was, aren't those people interesting?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You thought you were going to have to leave because it offended you?
In this setting. There, I was looking at specimens.
But in this setting, you wanted to leave because you...
Because it's just so charged. It was so real.
Wow.
And the lines that he was pushing at of really what's blasphemy and what isn't. I mean, well, you'd have to see it, but I mean, it was overwhelming is what I'm saying.
Until it was contained.
Until it was
framed. It was framed.
framed up. And then you just, aren't those people interesting? Certainly have a lot of passion.
Were you there too, John? You were in
I saw the piece in Atlanta, but I didn't see it in Louisville.
Okay.
You saw it in Atlanta in a theater?
Yeah, it didn't make the impression on me that.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, and so I don't remember it much, but you know, things are like that because the listener creates the story.
Right.
But I've been wondering since, on another track, since the project was first presented to us, what is, aside from the cleverness of the phrase race peace, why is it race peace?
Because
Why
the
is it
cleverness
called
of the I think what we were getting together was to talk about race dynamics. We was getting together to take that. And somebody, I mean, we were saying race peace, like it's going to be race P-E-I-C-E or P-I-E-C or whatever it is spelled for you. Anyway, we were saying it in that reference, right? And somebody put race peace by accident, or maybe not by accident. Who you did that?
Yeah, it was like, you know, as we're applying for these grants to support the work, we couldn't say it's the race piece, P-I-E-C-E.
Right.
So we were just sitting around and said, what about race peace? You know, and what does that mean? That, you know, peace and race, you know, it's R-E that separate, you know, P-E, you take the P-E and replace it with an R, you have race. I mean, it's just, we started to play with the words, and then what does it mean to have peace amongst races? And is that what we're shooting for? We're shooting for an understanding of how we can move past race to come to some semblance of bringing peace to that conversation. And I think that was the thinking behind it. I don't think it got too much deeper than that. Maybe it did.
It started, but yeah. No, go ahead.
A while back, you said we can't have any peace without justice, and so I'd like to hear you expound on that.
Oh, that's it.
That's it. What does that mean in terms of racial dynamics in this country?
Well, It seems to me that when my dad, when I was a kid, my dad wanted to have peace and quiet at home. He would say, let's have some peace around here, which means you guys shut up. You know,
That's real.
and if you don't, I got a strap that's going to help you get quiet.
To bring some peace.
Yeah.
That's authoritarianism.
Well, that's what he said.
That's what he called it.
That's what he did, and we got peace. My mother had another practice when we were kids. Whenever there was, whenever my brother and I were fighting, which we did a lot, she got out the peace table. Now this is about 1947, when the peace to follow the Second World War wasn't a big thing. Big thing about getting the peace in Europe and peace and so forth. And it was all done through negotiations at tables. And so Mother said, y'all sit at the peace table until y'all work out a treaty. And we didn't want to sit down there, of course. But she would enforce this peace process. And ultimately, we learned how to negotiate with each other, my brother and me.
You'll still fight?
Oh no, he's too much too big now.
Your mom was a Wilsonian.
And we had to work out an agreement and bring it to her. So this is what we agree on. We're gonna do this, and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do that. And if she found it a viable treaty,
She said it.
or if she was tired of sitting on us to make sure we didn't get up. It was a card table usually, you know, old-fashioned.
Folding legs.
Folding legs. It wouldn't take too much action, so. Or, you know, people mean different things by the same words sometimes, you know. And when I got involved in the movement and we started coming to town to some of that mess, as town fathers, generally fathers and not many mothers, saw it as a disruption of the peace, you know, and we were coming to disrupt the peace. And what they meant by peace was sort of like what my father meant by peace. You know, they wanted it quiet and orderly like it had always been. And that's peace. And if you didn't agree, you could go to jail or get out of town or whatever you do, don't disrupt our peace, you know?
Was your mom's activity of coming to the table a form of justice between you and your brother? Was justice served in that act?
I don't know. We learned how to be clever about our differences and to frame our differences in a way that Mother would not be disturbed by them. And sometimes we actually, after we got a little older, it only worked for 3-4 years, I think. Because by the time we were 9 and 10 or so, somewhere in that category, we're a year apart most of the time. We learned that Mother could have peace and we could have peace and keep on doing what we had done. You know, well, I don't know whether it was justice or not. She didn't say anything about justice. She said, this is the peace table. I don't want you disturbing my peace. She kind of meant the same thing that white folks meant when we came to Crystal Springs.
Don't disturb the peace.
Don't disturb the peace. But I don't know. I mean, so I'm just trying to come to grips with what your intentions are.
Well, the intention initially was that was a working title. That we would move towards something else, and somehow the language began to stick.
And what, in a way that, we were using this metaphor of in the race piece, we had always said from a long time ago, but then through the approval process, we're going to do that piece about race, the race piece, and it just kept sticking there. But then we also started to play with this metaphor of, in that initial title, the rat race and the race and the inability to find, maybe stillness is the wrong word, but a stop measure to look and analyze what's going on, because we're always progressing towards our own agendas.
And illuminating this competitiveness, like you talked about, slaves and poor white people not coming together, it's a form of competitiveness for survival.
But I think it's interesting in your formulation that what was assumed is no justice, no peace, but justice is not in your title. So, just given what what John was saying, clearly you can have peace. You can enforce a peace without justice. So the title's not self-evident that just because you have peace and race doesn't equal justice.
Well, we have no means of enforcing peace. It's, people doing a show.
This is a question I had the other day. I mentioned to Bruce that maybe we will find in the creation of this